Okay, that's on, isn't it? Okay, everyone, thank you. If we're starting this afternoon session a little bit early, but I'm hoping that means we can leave a little bit early and we can all be inspired to go and in our gardens this afternoon and just reflect on the day. We may have an extra 10 minutes. So, good afternoon, everyone. I think it's a great sign of a conference. We've got so many people here still on a Friday afternoon, so really pleased to see you all. I'm Vicky Fraser. I'm Chief Exec of LNP, and when I can also fit it in the day, I'm Service Director for Environment and Connectivity in Cornwall Council. It's a real privilege to be Chief Exec of LNP, and today has just been, it's been completely humbling, and I know we've heard everyone's saying how inspiring it is, but it really has been inspiring, and we need that. We know the challenge is big, we know the challenge is really stark, we know it's really hard, we know about national funding, all of those big challenges, but today, just to take the time out to speak to people and to hear those brilliant pledges has truly been inspiring. And that part for me today, the diversity of those pledges, all the different people doing some wonderful things has been really, really inspiring, really great. Thank you to everyone who's helped organise today, and my team have been brilliant, and Tevi for sponsoring such a brilliant event. And just in the workshop I was in about community engagement, I just wanted to just reflect on something I heard, which I really liked. We shouldn't say biodiversity, we should say bioabundance, because actually that's what we want. I just really like that. So thank you to, I think it was Nick, I've stolen that off you, it's really good. So this is a chance for our final session to meet the board members and ask questions of our panel. I'll ask the board members to introduce themselves in a second. It's really to understand what is the LNP doing to help support nature recovery and meet our targets. So without further ado, if I could just ask our panel to introduce themselves. I just ought to say actually that we've had a couple of our board members haven't been able to attend for various reasons this afternoon, but we've got some willing volunteers who are standing in their place, but they'll identify themselves as we go through. So,
okay, Robin Tuvison, Chair.
Mark Rice, I'm Area Director for the Environment Agency.
I'm Sian Rees, I'm a marine conservation scientist and represent Marine on the board.
Hi, I'm Claire Parnell. I'm also a board member on the Local Enterprise Partnership and the Rural Lead, but my day job is a farmer.
Good afternoon, my name is Martin Howlett. I am the other farmer on the board and also the chairman of the Tamar Valley AOMB.
Hi, I'm Wesley Smith. I'm Natural England's area manager for Devon, Cornwall and Scilly.
Okay, thank you. I've ended up with the mic again. I'll leave that over with you, Wesley. So we have a roving mic in the audience. So over to questions from the audience, please. Just stick your hand up and we'll take it from there.
I know it's late in the day, but surely some of you got something you want to ask. Valerie, come on.
So I don't actually love the sound of my own voice. I do, but if there's obviously time to ask a question, so I will. It's just something I asked Martin about a moment ago, actually. And I used to work at Duchy College, not, as I was saying, not in the education section, but I remember asking the staff, if they had any sort of ecological courses for their students or, sort of environmental sensitive farming, and there was very, very little on offer, and I had heard that had improved, but I think somebody mentioned earlier in one of the presentations that there's a really sore lack of sort of training for young farmers. I mean, I know we're engaging with primary school children, which is fantastic, but as I was saying to Martin, what about the young adults, and particularly young farmers? Surely we should be working with them more.
Thank you. Martin or Claire, could I ask you to take that one, please?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Val, I think it's a very important point, and we have to remember that they are our future. That they are our next generation, and we very much got to engage not only directly in farm, on running the farms, but also in all the various aspects that, we getting feedback? Same way it was? No, I thought it was getting feedback. It's very important that we do remember that, you know, they have that whole skill set that it's very important that we develop in terms of the environment. And I will further add that although many will go through agricultural colleges, we do have the benefit of Duchy College and the wider Cornwall College here in the Duchy, in the county, that we directly engage with them, but also of farmer sons and daughters and those who are involved in agriculture are really stepping forward, knowing that change is coming, not only through transition of our way that our farm support is paid, but look into the future, look into how they can really help improve the environment and make farms sustainable. And the work of other groups like the net zero groups that are springing up and down around the country, really it's a fresh generation coming forward, wanting to learn and wanting to see that they can make the difference. Possibly Claire can comment also about other aspects.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, we are lucky that we do have quite a sort of cohort of that sort of 40-something farmers who are really well connected with each other through their sort of social media networks and so on, and really engage with each other about best practice. And we need to sort of get into those groups and help them work through. The other thing is, I think, you know, a good example is a Cornwall manufacturers group, which is a lot of the private sector manufacturers who felt that the colleges weren't providing them with the people they needed, or with those people with the skills they needed. So they worked with Cornwall College to set up a sort of academy which sort of brought 14 to 16-year-olds to understand the range of jobs within their businesses and helped them target, you know, those skills and deliver what the industry needed. And I think that's a really good lesson for us to learn, to say, look at the range of jobs in agriculture and look at how you need to change your understanding of green skills and so on, and really challenge the colleges to provide those skills for us.
Thank you. Next question.
I'm really excited by the idea of nature recovery, and particularly by forming nature recovery networks. And I've been going out and talking to various members of the local community. And what I'm hearing various different things, but I'm finding that there is a low level of awareness of nature recovery networks at the moment in the wider community. So how do we ramp it up so that everybody knows what a nature recovery network is and how it can work?
You'd like to take that one, Robin? Would you like to have a go at that?
Yeah, it's. It was interesting being in the community group, coming in on that this afternoon, and all the ideas that were there. As a local nature partnership covering the whole of Cornwall and Scilly, then we have the partners, and we try to publicise what's going on, what we're doing, all of that sort of side, but we are not the deliverers ourselves. And just as this conference has shown, the real action is taking place. Yeah, sure, a lot of strategic work, a lot of important work is taking place at county and Cornwall and Scilly level, but those local networks are going to be really, really important. One of the things I've been trying to get going, but is sort of happening on the climate change side, is at parish level to have a resource that allows to go out there to help parishes and other community groups actually to get going. One of the things that is quite clear is that there's a huge wish to move forward on this area, on a local community area. And one of the problems is there's maybe, how many parishes are there in Cornwall? 200 and something, 300? Everybody's sort of, not everybody, I'm exaggerating, but everybody's trying to invent the wheel and find the way through. And what I want to be able to do is one of the missions of the LNP at our level is to be able to spread that knowledge even beyond the people that attended today, and set those networks up, give them confidence, and find a real way to work forward as part of that community engagement. That's one of my missions. I haven't got there yet, but with Vicky's help as Chief Executive and myself, we will make sure it happens somehow. But I think on the climate side, that's really already starting to happen. But let's have those two topics together. They work together. Let's keep them together.
No, thank you, Robin. And Robin was giving me a good nudge there, because that is absolutely something that we are committed to do. Not just working with parishes, but actually in our group, I was in the community engagement group. We talked at the table about how important schools are. Mount Spade today. I mean, that was just brilliant. But schools are the centre of our communities. They also sit on a lot of land, and our children are our future. So it's having a resource that can go out and enable that delivery is going to be key. So that's something we're going to do. Yes, please, Martin, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't want to hog the microphone all the time, but I was just at a point as regards schools, as Vicky's just mentioned, and I and many other farms across the county do encourage schools to visit farms to understand not only where their food comes from, but how food, farming and environment all link together. And that is a real appetite out there, particularly in the primary schools. You'd be very surprised, and we're pushing an open door, I know, but by I would encourage anybody who has links with PTAs, with school governors, what have you, to try and make sure that schools do get out onto farms to see and understand how farming and environment are so closely linked. There are the big national events like Open Farm Sunday that happen every June, Sunday 11th of June this year for those who want to get involved straight after the Royal Cornwall Show, I know, for us, but at least it's another opportunity for the public to see and engage with nature firsthand on farms. So I would encourage that to be very widespread, and it's a good way of introducing the whole environmental, because they're doing it as part of their curriculum, even at primary age, so we've really got to help be that resource.
Thank you, Martin. Okay.
Hi. Yeah, it's been really interesting today to hear, and really positive to hear, like, lots of interesting stories about investment in recovery projects being started by the community, but I think it can be really depressing for people who engage with that when they see kind of ecological vandalism that does far more damage than we can ever repair. And I wonder what the panel thinks about the kind of role for government regulation and enforcement and how that fits with local nature recovery. Because small groups can do lots of good, but individuals, businesses, private sector, utilities can do huge amounts of damage that can sometimes be irreparable and often seem to be getting away with it.
Thank you. Robin, could I ask you to just talk a bit about enforcement, but then I may, because this is quite a detailed area of work that the LMP is looking at. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief. Then I'll hand it over to the enforcers here on the panel. Enforcement is one of the big things that I have on my mind. One of the things that came out from the environmental growth strategy when we looked at what was going on was that just in the area of planning permissions, then I think it will put me right or wrong, I can't remember, it was 40% of conditions, environmental conditions on planning were never implemented by whoever developed it at the time. This seemed to me to be an atrocious statistic. In other roles that I've had and hats that I've worn, the UK is sometimes described as an enforcement-free nation in many areas. I think that's changing. I think the pressure is to change. Why Vicky has passed me the microphone at this point is that we are we have just started undertaking a proper report and investigation into enforcement in its broadest sense on environmental issues in Cornwall and Scilly. And that's under the purview of Vicky, and it's something we take very seriously and something that we want to find real evidence on so we can push the case. There is huge willingness, I think, to enforce, but it tends to be at the end of the queue, and the thing that really annoys me is that it discriminates hugely against those that keep to the rules, and apart from the environmental degradation that arises, but I shall hand on to the enforcers.
Shall I go next? Yeah. So Mark Rice from the Environment Agency. I mean, we play a key role in responding to environmental offending, and enforcement enforcement is a key aspect of our work. I mean, it is true that government grants in aid is what we use to take enforcement action, and that has declined over recent years, and so there has been some criticism of the Environment Agency in response, in relation to our record on prosecuting offenders. I think there's a lot of public scrutiny at the moment, particularly in terms of how we regulate and take enforcement action against the water industry. And I was really pleased with the decision in the last couple of weeks to award record fines against South West Water for a range of environmental offending. 2.1 million, I think, was the total fine that was levied on the company. And there is evidence that the courts are taking this much more seriously, and I think the Environment Agency will need to respond in terms of enforcement action. We have a large and growing number of case files that we're taking against those that break the law, and we do take these things extremely seriously. And I would encourage people always to report incidents of environmental offences to us and pollution incidents. Even if we can't respond, that they're not so serious, it helps us to identify a pattern of behaviour and provides really important intelligence to us. So, yeah, that's a plea.
Mark, can I just to say, you're absolutely right to remind us it's actually the courts that actually make the decisions, and of course sometimes their ability to fine sufficiently has not been great enough, and that hasn't helped the regulators.
I suppose the only other thing I would say is that going to the court is the last thing, and enforcement action is a range of measures that you can take. So advice and guidance is often our first approach. I'll hand over.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to add a couple of things. So one is that we already have a huge amount. We already have a huge amount of regulation in this country that actually is an incredibly powerful legislative tool. The issue has always been around the funding and the appetite to enforce those rules. And Mark's right. You know that the world has changed. The courts are now starting to think about these things differently. So we in Natural England have had some successes recently where we've seen record fines and custodial sentences being handed down by the courts against people who are damaging sites of special scientific interest. But it is hugely expensive. It is hugely expensive to take people, to prosecute people, take them through the court system, through the various sorts of stages of appeals. And as Mark said, that is the last resort. We are much more successful when we talk to people about incentives and encouraging people to do the right thing, because generally most people do want to do the right thing. And we need to recognise that. But we also need to recognise that, you know, what we don't need is more and more regulation and legislation. We've got the legislative tools we need. We just need, I suppose, the sort of government backing to take that.
Thank you. Next question.
That's quite a good one to follow on from. Just with my Cornwall councillor hat on, enforcement of planning is also an issue. And I know that in some areas, councils will actually put a stop on works until they've done the investigation, but Cornwall Council don't do that. And actually, I think that's, in terms of impact on natural environment, once it's gone, you can't replace it. So maybe that's something that ought to be challenged, I think, at a Cornwall level. But my question really was about, we've got strategic policies, and maybe I'm getting a bit long in the tooth, but as Pip said earlier, we've been through lots of policies and strategies. The issue is doing and getting it done, and how we actually do in a strategic fashion, because obviously when you're talking about land management or water management, coastal management, you can't
just do it in ad hoc and piecemeal. And yet what seems to be happening at the moment in terms of funding opportunities, etc., is all piecemeal. There's no strategic pots for things. And I wonder whether there's an appetite or aspiration within Cornwall and Scilly to try and create that strategic pot that actually has a strategic view over what's needed, rather than people putting in for their own little environmental scheme, but it's not connected to the fact that somebody down the road's doing something similar, and actually if we all work together we could connect something up and make something that was actually added value.
Thank you, Lovely. Who on the panel would like to...
Shall I kick it off? So I think, you know, the sort of, I suppose, the history and the current situation around funding for works around the environment, for grants and so, it comes from multiple sources, and it is really difficult actually for any one person to grab a hold, to understand what all the funding opportunities are, what are the constraints and conditions that come with that funding. But one of the things that you know, Cornwall Council, in support of the LNP, doing is about trying to bring together a sort of a catalogue of all those bids that people want to, all those initiatives that people want to take forward that they're looking for funding for. It doesn't quite answer the sort of what you're suggesting, Loveday, around a strategic framework, but it at least is a place where there is a sort of a compendium which others can go and reference to see what other sorts of initiatives have been talked about within Cornwall.
Thank you. I suppose just to add to that as well, Loveday, which maybe what you're referring to, Wes, but we've got the LNP now has a pipeline of schemes ready to deliver, so that's a really important step forward, and coordinating and overseeing that pipeline, able to see where there are links between schemes, be able to get more value. So when we do go forward to bid into these multiple pots of funding that inevitably are out there, we're able to get some good value by seeing all of these schemes in one place in a pipeline of deliverable projects.
You put it so much better than me.
Any further questions, Pip?
Hello. Cornwall Council have declared a climate emergency, and there's a drive for the UK to be a net zero nation by 2050 by the government, national government. I'm just wondering if, I know that this is about nature recovery, but the climate change is, you know, affected and created by several different elements, net zero being a very, very important one. And I just wondered if there is a plan that will be applied for businesses within Cornwall, within the southwest, to try to drive toward that ambition and to recognise the sort of effect and impact they're having on the environment, and if they can be supported. It's not about trying to get away with things, it's just about not being necessarily informed and educated enough, and how they might be supported in reaching those ambitions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass to Martin first, and then also Mark Holmes, who's Head of Service in Cornwall Council, give a bit more information on that. But
yeah, so to answer your question directly as regards business, I can't speak of the wider business world, but certainly in the farming world, the commitment there to net zero has been very clearly laid out by the farming unions, that we are, because we realise it's a big challenge, we've gone down the middle for 2040. So although government have gone 2050, Cornwall Council will go on 2030. You know, if we get there earlier, obviously farms will do so, but there is a full farming commitment from the whole of the agricultural industry to be there by 2040. It's also useful to know that not only is it just about trying to meet net zero to try and obviously meet the climate emergency, but also in terms of our efficiencies on farm, it's coincided with the change where since we've left Europe, as regards the agricultural transition, so greater efficiencies, making better use of resource, and standing on our own feet. We're only the second area in the world, remember, to actually take this bold step to move away from farm support. New Zealand did it in the 1980s. The UK obviously are very determined that we will get to that point. So the fact that the two are going in tandem, I think, is really a big challenge to farmers, for farming, but we're up for the challenge because, as I've often said on these sorts of platforms, when it comes to climate change, although we may be part of the issue, part of the problem, we're very much part of the solution in the fact that we can sequester and do many multiple things within what it affects 75% of our UK farm, 75% of our land is farmed in one way or another. So we have that big challenge, but we're up for it.
Can I just add that yesterday the government launched its second round of what are called nature recovery pilots. So this is part of the new environmental land management scheme. And one of the sort of priorities that they wish to see applications coming forward for is exactly around climate change within and net zero within the farmed landscape. So there is an increasing emphasis on within government about looking at the mechanisms needed to support that transition to net zero.
Yes, I think just as from a wider sort of strategic perspective, you're quite right in the sense you can't look at these areas in isolation. So we've focused our efforts as Cornwall Council and working with partners around the need to respond to the climate and ecological emergency and acknowledge the need to adapt to an already changing climate. So we've heard earlier about the local nature recovery strategy and what that's going to do in terms of shaping how we respond to the ecological emergency and try and help nature recover. There's a couple of key pieces of work and opportunities coming forward linked more to net zero. So the Shared Prosperity Fund has had a series of calls out, one of which is around business support and advice and guidance, along with funds to support and help communities move to more of a net zero way. But as Cornwall Council has just secured, on behalf of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, £500,000 to develop a local area energy plan. So what that does is that looks at all aspects of energy, and that includes heating, electricity, transport, and then develops a spatial-based approach to decarbonise. So that will map out what Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly needs to do to decarbonise all of those areas. It's a whole systems approach, so it looks at the regulatory and the funding requirements, and will develop a plan about how to implement that, including identifying areas of investment opportunities for private funds, for individuals, where local authority or government might need to provide more funding, and where there's legislative barriers that need to be changed. So that's a piece of work that will be co-designed with key sectors, communities. We're just in the implementation phase, but over the next 2-3 weeks, there should be a formal announcement and the timeline of workshops that will be held across Cornwall with businesses, with young people, with communities across Cornwall to start to work on what are those priorities, what are those opportunities that are there. And it also creates a spatial element to it as well. So much like the local nature recovery strategy has the maps and the zones where activity can happen, the local area energy plan will do the same for energy, and it will map across each town. Each area will have certain opportunities and challenges that need to be overcome, and it will start to be able to bring them together into key investment opportunities, identify job creation, skill shortages, etc. alongside that. So with that piece of work running in parallel to the local nature recovery strategy, and we're also about to start work on an adaptation strategy for Cornwall following the publication of the climate risk assessment last year. We've got 3 aligned pieces of work, all requiring co-design engagement with the communities, but should map out those challenges and opportunities and where we need to adapt and change in response to climate and ecological emergencies.
Okay, I think if we take one more question, please.
Hey, thank you, wonderful Nature Partnership people. My question is about the regional networking. So when I was lucky enough to be in your seats, we used to have a Southwest Nature Partnership collection, and Cornwall was one of the stronger ones at the time. I just wondered, is that still alive? Have we got a chance of strengthening relationships beyond the Tamar and think bioregionally? Thank you.
Would like to take that one.
In the southwest, we have a really successful partnership for marine, which is the Southwest Marine Ecosystems, where we join up across Devon, Scilly and Cornwall and Somerset and Dorset to share observations around the state of nature each year in the southwest. We report on indicators and we're currently in that process of trying to capture what that model is and share it nationally. So it's working for marine, but I don't know the status of land stuff.
In terms of the local nature partnerships in the old sort of southwest regional development area, so right up to Gloucestershire, we do meet virtually once every 3 months or so, and that's really good getting that feedback between the two. There is at Natural England level, they are looking at whether there's a synergy coming from a broader grouping. There is an organisation which I'd never heard of called Nature North, which does all sorts of things around natural capital. So that's something Wesley probably know more about than I, but is being looked at the moment. But yes, absolutely. If there's one thing that we know is that biodiversity, nature, environment, that's the one thing that doesn't stop at the Tamar. The way we put butter and cream on our scones may change at that point, but the rest doesn't. So it's really important that we stay there. And of course, Martin as chair of Tamar AOMB, that's very much a Cornwall and Devon enterprise as well. But both Wesley and Mark cross that border, so I'll pass over to them.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say something. So I think, it is a really important point. Of course, we are at the sort of pointy end of a long peninsula, but we're not completely isolated. And, the nature recovery network that the first question alluded to is a national network. It's an international network. And I think, when we talk about things like the local nature recovery strategy for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, we do need to be mindful of what's happening in Devon and beyond, because we want nature to be able to sort of thrive, and that means being able to move. So we have to work with our partners in Devon and beyond. In terms of the reference to Nature North, so in the north of England, on the back of the Northern Powerhouse, there is a group of sort of partners around the environment have got together to try and influence a big, ambitious agenda around the environment in that part of the world. And I think what's happening is people are looking at that and saying, are there lessons that we can learn about how we get more traction around the environmental agenda at that sort of regional strategic level? But it's early days. But I think the ambition is there to really drive this agenda. And I was really struck by something that Richard said this morning in his opening speech, which was, by the time we get to the next general election, the whole of the next parliament will be tasked with delivering the 2030 ambitions. And, it's going to be really, really challenging. We're going to have to find new forms of governance, new forms of levering money and support in. We're going to need a huge amount of political backing to be able to do it, because it will require really difficult choices. It won't be that's a lovely ambition as long as I'm not inconvenienced, or I don't have to change my business, or I don't have to think about the world slightly differently. It's going to be massive. And we are going to have to look at some of these governance structures around how we work together to enable that to happen. Whether it's a nature north type model or not, I don't know, but we are going to have to look again at this stuff.
Thank you, Wes. It is a very important point to finish on. I think I said I'd offer you 10 minutes back, but I know we are gonna go to closing remarks now. So thank you all for your participation in that session, and give ourselves all a round of applause.
Okay, thanks guys. And they do deserve the applause because they are very dedicated as a group to the Local Nature Partnership. As you know, they get no remuneration whatsoever, only extra duties. So I'm very, very grateful to them for their support of Cornwall and Scilly in terms of Local Nature Partnership. That comes to the end of our session today. Thank you so much for your participation. As I've said, the Local Nature Partnership in Cornwall and Scilly is a partnership. It is around all our partners. I sometimes describe it, we are not a retail organisation in that we don't have actual members like the wildlife trusts and others such as RSPB or whatever. So we rely on others to deliver. One of the things that came out from that session was about strategies, and that's all great. We've had them before, as Loveday so well put it. We sometimes go round the circle. One of my key actions, or one of my key areas of management of the LNP, and we discussed this as our last meeting on the Isles of Scilly last week, is that this local nature recovery strategy has to be all around ability to deliver. I don't want perfection. I don't want a brilliantly glossy booklet that DEFRA say is the best one they've ever received. I want something that actually changes nature in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly and make sure that we move towards a success for 2030. That is our focus. That is what we're going to do, because otherwise everything else is not worth it, and we might as well go off and do even more useful things like enforcing planning conditions or whatever. Anyway, can I thank you all very much for attending. It's been great. It's been an inspiration to me. It's been a lesson to me as well of all the things that we need to get on with, and we're going to come back in a year's time and see how we're progressing further. What I do want to do lastly, though, is to thank a number of people. Once again, TEVI, and dare I say the European Union, for financing part of this. That's my one bit of politics I'm going to talk about today. No more on Brexit. But in terms of a Martian, if he or she was in this audience, they would probably look up and think, my goodness, that Local Nature Partnership, what a team that they've got employed there that work full-time doing everything that we do. Well, let me tell you, we're completely dependent in that resource on our local authorities. And what I do want to do is to thank the dedication that they have, because they all have other jobs which take up another 90% of their time. So I just want to I'm going to ask them to stand up. Vicky Fraser, our Chief Executive. Vicky, where are you? You're over there. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing and making things like the enforcement right. That's great. Mark there, Mark Holmes, who tends to sideline us when he decides to solve the climate change crisis by himself. So Mark, thank you very much. Pip, that drives so much. Where are you, Pip? You're over there. She's responsible not just for writing the local nature recovery strategy that you want her to write, but also I'm making sure that she implements it up to 2030 as well. We have Dougie, who is over there, new to the team, but great on comms and everything else that he does. I'm particularly thankful for Lorna. Lorna, if you'd like to stand up, please, who does all the administration for the Local Nature Partnership. But the one person I really, really, really want to thank for last year, for today, and all the other things that she does in terms of Cornwall Sustainability Awards and the rest is Verian Jones. Verian, please. Stand up. You've got to stand up. Believe me, they're a great team. Thank you so much for attending. Have a safe journey home and have a really busy weekend restoring nature. Thanks very much indeed.